Remember that feeling like when the calendar flipped over to the year 2000?
Yeah.
That whole new millennium thing?
Yeah.
We were all kind of staring at our computers, right?
Yeah.
Half expecting that Y2K bug to just like, I don't know, send us back to the Stone Age or
Yeah.
something.
Right.
It didn't, obviously.
Thankfully, no.
But even though, like, the world didn't implode, something still felt, I don't know,
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, it was a weird time.
It was like we were all teetering on the edge of something huge, but we couldn't quite wrap our heads around it.
Totally. It was this strange mix of optimism and dread, like the Cold War was over, technology was exploding, but
But there was this undercurrent of anxiety,
it's
too.
exactly like a feeling that things were changing faster than we could even process it.
And right smack in the middle of all this, you have Radiohead dropping Kid A.
Oh, yeah.
Not exactly, party music, right?
Yeah, not really.
But somehow it became the soundtrack for a whole generation trying to figure out this new world.
It's pretty wild when you think about it.
We've been digging into all sorts of stuff for this deep dive. Interviews, reviews, even old fan blogs. And it's clear that Kid A was more than just, like, an album.
Way
It
more.
was a cultural moment.
For sure.
So we're going to try to unpack how this music, born out of, well, a pretty messed up time, ended up connecting with so many people so deeply.
It's a fascinating story, really.
It really is.
And I think to really get Kid A, you kind of have to get the world it came from, The late 90s, early 2000s.
It was a time of major transition.
Absolutely. I mean, think back to that pre-millennium tension.
Oh, yeah.
All that Y2K stuff. I mean, it turned out to be nothing, but it was like this symbol,
Totally.
this fear that all our technology, all this progress could just vanish.
Like the systems we relied on were suddenly fragile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just hypothetical stuff either. The world was witnessing some really heavy things.
Yeah, like those horrific genocides in Bosnia and Rwanda.
Right. It completely shattered this idea that the end of the Cold War meant like automatic peace.
Like we'd reached the end of history or something.
Yeah, right. And on top of all that, you have the internet just exploding onto the scene.
It was like this tidal wave.
Promising connection, but also this insane flood of information. It's like everything you thought was solid was suddenly fluid.
Like the rug was being pulled out from under us constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually a term for that feeling. Liquid modernity.
Okay, gotta admit, liquid modernity sounds a little, academic.
Aha, fair enough.
What does that actually mean for, like,
Yeah.
regular people? How are they feeling?
So imagine this. Everything you thought was stable, everything you could count on, suddenly starts to melt away. Values, institutions, even your sense of self.
Whoa.
It's like a constant state of...
Everything's in motion.
Yeah, and it's driven by technology accelerating like crazy, globalization, blurring all the lines. It's overwhelming.
No wonder everyone was freaking out.
The sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, who came up with this idea of liquid modernity, argued that this constant change created this deep sense of unease, almost like a vertigo.
A feeling of falling.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is the world Radiohead's living in as they're writing Kid A. No wonder it sounds so unsettled.
It's like a sonic reflection of that unease.
But wasn't the band also dealing with some of their own stuff at this point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they were coming off the huge, massive success of OK Computer.
They were on the verge of superstardom.
Right, and it wasn't necessarily a comfortable place for them to be.
Especially for Tom York.
Yeah, he seemed to be really struggling with it.
It's easy to forget that these guys came from a working class background in England,
Totally.
That whole idea of selling out, of becoming this huge corporate rock band, it didn't sit well with them.
No, not at all.
The pressure to follow up OK Computer with another hit must have been intense.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
So you've got this band already wrestling with their own demons, and then they get hit with all this global anxiety about the future.
It's a recipe for...
Well, something, a musical breakdown. Or maybe a breakthrough.
It's interesting because in Radiohead's case, it was kind of both.
How so?
Well, they basically went into the studio and said, okay, let's throw out all the rules.
They pushed themselves way outside their comfort zone.
Yeah, no more straight-ahead guitar rock.
They embraced all these electronic sounds.
Synths, samplers, you name it.
Experimenting with textures, atmosphere, creating something that was intentionally difficult.
They wanted to make you work for it.
To really listen.
Absolutely.
So they basically locked themselves in a studio, surrounded by all these crazy new sounds, trying to channel all this anxiety into what? Like, did they even know what they were making?
You know, from everything I've read, it sounds like it was a really experimental process, almost chaotic. Even they
Yeah.
talked about like reducing everything to rubble first,
Wow.
tearing down their old way of making music before trying to build something new.
And out of the rubble came Kid A.
Yeah. And there's this great story about when the record execs heard it for the first time.
Oh, I bet they loved it.
They were expecting, like, okay, Computer 2,
The next big hit.
something easy to sell. But when they heard Kid A, silence, total silence.
Oof. I can only imagine the looks on their faces.
Yeah, I don't think they knew what to make of it.
So how did the critics react to this radical shift in sound?
At first, a lot of head scratching, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Some critics gave them props for being ambitious, but a lot of them just didn't get it.
It was so different.
Right. There were accusations of being pretentious, of being, deliberately difficult.
That's got to sting after the almost universal praise for K-Computer.
Yeah, it was definitely a wake-up call.
But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
While the critics were busy arguing about whether Kid A was brilliant or a total flop, the fans reacted differently.
Tell me more.
The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts,
Wow.
and it went on to sell millions of copies worldwide.
It was a phenomenon.
It really was.
Whoa. And I think it really shows how much Kid A tapped into the anxieties of that time.
So you're saying people were actually looking for music that reflected their unease
Yeah.
rather than trying to escape from it.
Yeah, exactly. Think about that feeling we talked about earlier, like that underlying sense of dread about the future.
Right.
Kid A didn't try to sugarcoat it or pretend it wasn't there.
It just embraced it.
Yeah. And songs like Everything in Its Right Place and How to Disappear Completely with all those swirling electronics and Tom York's voice.
It's haunting.
It's like they captured that feeling of being totally overwhelmed, of wanting to just disappear.
But Kid A isn't all doom and gloom, right? There are moments of beauty in there, too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's part of what makes it so powerful.
It acknowledges the darkness, but it doesn't wallow in it.
Exactly. It suggests that there's something else out there, something beyond all the anxiety and fear.
Like a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, like in Idiotique, for example. You've got this crazy, chaotic beat, but then it breaks down, and there's this moment of quiet, almost peace.
It's like come up for air after being underwater for too long.
Yes. It's like Kid A is saying, hey, the world might be a scary place, but we don't have to let that fear consume us.
It's about finding those moments of connection, of beauty, even when everything feels like it's falling apart.
And I think that's what resonated with so many people. Kid A wasn't just an album, it was like a lifeline.
A way to make sense of a world that felt increasingly out of control.
Exactly. It validated their feelings, helped them feel less alone.
And all of this was happening against the backdrop of liquid modernity, that constant feeling of uncertainty and flux that we talked about earlier.
It all ties together.
So Kid A became more than just music. It was like this cultural artifact, a snapshot of a specific moment in time.
It captured something essential about that era.
And maybe even about our own era, too.
And it's interesting, too, because even within the band, they weren't all on the same page about all this anxiety stuff. Oh, yeah.
You know, you had Tom York, obviously, super deep in it, almost consumed by the dread.
Yeah.
But other members, like Johnny Greenwood, seemed to approach the music with a little more, I don't know, detachment, even a little playfulness at times.
So it wasn't just about capturing, like, this collective mood. It was about filtering all that anxiety through the different personalities in the band.
Exactly. And you hear that in the music, too.
How so?
Well, take York's lyrics, for example. They're often really fragmented, abstract,
Yeah.
filled with this sense of unease, almost like a premonition of societal collapse or something.
Intense.
But then you have Greenwood's musical contributions, which are often really intricate,
Yeah.
even beautiful, you know.
So it's like they were having this conversation musically about all these huge existential questions.
Exactly. And the cool thing is there are no easy answers, no tidy resolutions.
And that's what makes Kid A so much more than just like a political album or a simple reflection of the
That's
times,
right.
right? Totally. It's art grappling with really complex ideas, complex emotions, and it leaves space for the listener to find their own meaning.
It doesn't tell you what to think.
No, it invites you to think for yourself, to engage with the world, even if it's uncomfortable.
To feel those feelings, even the unsettling ones.
Right. Because those feelings are real. They're part of the human experience.
You know, when I first heard Kid A, I was in college, just starting to, figure out my own place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like nothing I'd ever heard before.
It's pretty unique.
Challenging, even a little scary at times, but also incredibly moving, you know?
Yeah, it gets under your skin.
It really did. It felt like he was speaking directly to my own anxieties about the future.
And that's the power of great art, isn't it? It meets you where you are, emotionally, intellectually, and it helps you make sense of your own experiences.
And I think that's a big reason why Kid A has aged so well. It's not tied to one specific moment. It speaks to something deeper, something about being human.
Our relationship with technology, our search for meaning in a world that can feel really chaotic.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think Kid A's lasting relevance tells us something about the anxieties of the 21st century. They haven't gone away. They've just
They've
evolved.
shaded, maybe?
They're even more embedded in our lives now.
It's like Kid A was prophetic almost.
It wasn't just reflecting the anxieties of the year 2000. It was tapping into something that still resonates with us today.
Which makes you wonder, if it came out today, in 2025, how would it be received?
Ooh, that's a good question. Would it still be hailed as a masterpiece, or would it just get dismissed as another, like, dystopian album?
Right? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. It's tough to say. I'd love to hear what our listeners think, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
Hit us up on the website, drop a comment, send us an email, let us know your take.
We love hearing from you guys.
We really do. But ultimately, I think Kid A's legacy lies in its ambiguity, its refusal to give you all the answers.
It's an album that rewards multiple listens, you know? You always discover something new.
So whether you've been a Radiohead fan since Pablo Honey, or you're just starting to explore their music, I highly recommend giving Kid A spin, or maybe a respin.
Listen closely, and you might just find it speaking to you in ways you didn't expect.
Because the world, let's be honest, is still kind of on edge.
Maybe even more so than it was back in 2000.
But within all that uncertainty, all that precariousness, there's also potential, right?
Absolutely. Potential for change, for evolution, for something new to emerge.
And who knows, maybe the soundtrack to that change is already out there, just waiting to be discovered.
Keep your ears open.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Radiohead's Kid A.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep listening.